Thank you, Sundus. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. This research, I just straight away dive into it, is a part of my doctoral research. My doctoral research is generally concerned with the interplay of the constructions of gender and gender identity, and basically womanhood, and the idea of paid work, in the neoliberal sense of the word, within a larger society, which has implications for both the construction of work and the construction of the idea of family and womanhood and other related concepts. So within this research, there's a very peculiar phenomenon, as Sundus already briefly mentioned, that there was this concept that came about somewhere in, I think, in the early 2010s. It was called the Dr. Brides. One of the most famous journalists, female journalists in Pakistan, she wrote a newspaper article, and it just, things went haywire after that. What she wrote about was that about 80 to 85% of the students enrolled in medical colleges, as they're called in Pakistan, instead of medical schools for technical reasons, about 80 to 85% of these students are female. However, if we were to take a look at the medical workforce, this number is very low. So in 2018-19, when I published this paper, the percentage of female medical, females in the medical workforce was 40%. Now, I do understand there's a lot of issue with the statistics here, because when we talk about the students enrolled in medical schools, we have a clear, figure of the gender ratio. But when it comes to the medical workforce, there can be several other contributing factors. One of them is cohort effect. Probably we get the numbers.
Sorry to interrupt, but I don't know if you are changing the slides.
Slides?
Because we don't see the change of slides.
We can, this is
now. Okay, thanks.
So this data comes from Pakistan Medical and Dental Council. It's called the PMDC. It's a government body with which every doctor has to register their license, the license for medical practice. So 40% of the registered doctors in Pakistan are women, or around 40 to 44%. I think it's 44%. And the rest are males. Now, I do understand that there might be some kind of a cohort effect going on here, probably because more of the older medical doctors are male, and because we don't have that kind of disaggregation in the data. However, these are speculations, and this calls for an in-depth investigation into the phenomenon of the Dr. Brides. So what Zakaria wrote in her newspaper article was that within the Pakistani society, especially in the middle and upper middle classes, the female doctor it's a very marriageable, entity in the marriage market. So the moment she gets out of her medical education, she gets really good marriage prospects and she gets married. And somehow the onus of this within the larger society fell on the woman, because most of the medical education in government medical colleges is highly subsidized. In some cases, I think about more than 10 million rupees is spent on one medical degree for one student. So there was this concept that women generally, tend to waste all this taxpayer money and then go get married. And therefore, there was a lot of uproar after this article was written. And in a very hasty decision, one of the provincial courts, what they did was that they took a decision to introduce a male quota in medical schools in Punjab, and they restricted the number of possible females to 50%. So only 50% of the medical school students could be females, the rest had to be males. Of course, this decision was challenged because a lot of women, female students who had, whatever criteria it was to get into medical school, they're way ahead of a lot of their male counterparts, but they weren't getting into medical schools because of this quota. So this decision was, I think, taken back within the matter of a couple of months. So, but medical students, female medical students, were stigmatized because this concept, and I happened to discuss this with a lot of my respondents during my research, that they were called out even during their medical education by some of their professors that you're wasting taxpayers' money, you're going to make rotis for some family after you complete this education. So I'll move on to the findings of the study as we move ahead, but this is the introduction of the study. So the research questions, of course, were that why do women pursue a professional degree, which is as intensive as medical education, if they eventually have to opt out of the workforce? Because by the time I did this research, a lot of it was being placed on the woman's agency, because as if she was opting out, and opt out is a buzzword in the in the organizational studies literature. And what are the reasons that contribute to this decision to opt out? So this research was looking for answers to these two interrelated questions. So could we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Theoretically, I used Syed and Özbilgin's relational framework. This is borrowed from, again, organizational studies literature, because my central idea was revolving around the idea of work. And again, I did my own doctoral education from a business school. So my lens was, of course, focused on the organization as the space where all of this happens, where the woman meets the work, working identity. So this theoretical framework, what it actually does is it's an organizational take on some of the theories of central conflation, borrows a lot from Bourdieu's work. And what it says is that there are several levels of reality happening and they're concurrent, and the boundaries are very fuzzy. The first level, they call it the macro national level, or the macro social level. This is the larger structure that defines the social constructions of the ideas of femininity and womanhood and motherhood and family and work. And then there's the meso level, the organizational level, which kind of bridges the macro national level and the micro individual level in the workspace, and it's one of the most important levels of analysis in my study. And then there's the micro individual level. This is basically the same structure versus agency debate, but we're introducing a centrally conflated idea, and we do it through the idea of the organization. So this could we move to the next? Thank you so much. All right, so we did some literature review to study the larger structure. We looked into the socio-economic, the socio-cultural influences on marriage and domesticity. Here we came across some ideas. For example, if you happen to read the paper, I'll share the link to the paper after this discussion, because I don't have a lot of time to go into these parts of the research, but I really like this part, so I would want people to read it. So some of this is borrowed from the idea of true womanhood, or the culture of domesticity, or the cult of true womanhood, where this is the early post-industrial revolution society, where the idea of womanhood was connected very heavily to the idea of domesticity, and there were virtues that were assigned to women being especially upper middle class and middle class women having virtues like piety and purity and submission and domesticity. And it was considered some kind of a class symbol for the woman to stay at home and be a good mother, an ideal mother, and be the fabric of the home and take care of the home while she's being provided for by the man, because the man is now not working in an agricultural society. The man is working in an industrial society and earning enough for the woman to stay at home where she belongs. So the Pakistani context borrows a lot from, of course, owing to its colonial past, from these discourses, but it also has its own indigenous discourses, which where you will find a lot of references to domesticity, whether it's the indigenous South Asian discourse or it's the Islamic discourse, where you will find concepts like gender segregation and parda, etc. So all of these kind of contribute to the idea of the woman being domesticated, being staying at home, or at least for it to be favorable for the woman to stay at home. So within this strand of research, we find the conceptualizations of marriage and associated gender roles. Here we'll find some the work of Ali Hochschild and Patricia Stone, who will talk about disproportionate household duties. And this is a global phenomenon. This is not just related to the Pakistani context, but there's a book that Ali Hochschild wrote. It's called The Double Shift, The Second Shift. And what it discusses is that post-World War II, when women were reintroduced into the workforce and the men came back from war, the lives of women, the work lives of women changed a lot. And the men are yet to, catch up to that. So while women have taken up a lot of roles in the organizational spaces, men have not taken up a similar kind of role in the home, in the domestic space. So that kind of brings a lot of the burden, disproportionate burden of the household responsibility to the woman. All right, and then there is, of course, this media influences of how women are perceived as primary caregivers. There's a very beautiful discourse analysis of ants. I think it's by Kuperberg and Stone that discusses how women are portrayed. The ideal woman is portrayed as the sorted woman who takes care of the house, and even if she has a job, it's symbolic. But she's the ideal woman is one who's sorted, who does her groceries and takes care of her children and has a clean house. And there is class associated to it. Okay. Then we did some literature review into the organizational reasons. I am assuming that a lot of people in my audience wouldn't be interested in the organizational studies literature per se, but here we talk about some structural organizational factors, that organizations are structured such that, and this is very important, this comes from the work of Joan Acker. It's seminal work, and again, I would like for people to read this work, because what it talks about is that in the neoliberal sense of the word, while the organization assumes a very non-gendered approach towards work, because work is not particularly gendered, organizations are very gendered in the way they define the ideas of work, of the ideal worker, of professionalism and professionality. And the woman, by the virtue of having a life outside of work, is rendered unprofessional by definition. She does not fit into the definition of the ideal profession, of the ideal worker. Why? Because she does not have that kind of time. She cannot be that industrious or competitive or instrumental or whatever the so defined characteristics of the ideal worker are. She cannot be that, right? Therefore, when she finds herself in a situation where she's not able to fit in to whatever the organization is expecting her to do, and the others, it's the family on the other side, which of course is perceived to be the primary part of her life, she has to make a choice, right? And the organization is not ready to play a role, at least in theory, to play a role in this situation, right? The organization pretends like, or exists like this unchangeable social space. Other than organizational structure reasons, there are organizational sociological reasons as well, again, as this part of the literature talks about how women are perceived as workers. And it also talks about economic and social psychological literature on gender bias in evaluations and performance in organizations, etc. So, and then there are, of course, there's the agency perspective, women's personal choice to work or not to work, and its interrelationship with how she conceptualizes the idea of work, the availability of alternate work, the woman having to relocate and not particularly quitting her career, but not working in Pakistan, for example, and changes in the conceptualizations of the traditional vocations. So these are some of the concepts that we came across in the literature. Moving on to the methodology, what we did was we interviewed 31 doctors from all across Pakistan. When I say all across Pakistan, we did interviews in all the provincial capitals. We couldn't go into the other cities. Of these 31, 19 were practicing as medical doctors. The others had, 12 of the rest had either quit their careers or had gotten married right after their education and had not been able to begin a career so far. And the others were working, particularly in the health sector, but not as doctors. So among the 19 who were currently practicing, 2 had taken breaks in their careers, one lasting, I think, as long as almost 7 years, right? So there was a lot of precarity on the face of it. The average age of the respondents was 30, but my youngest respondent was, I think, 24. The oldest respondent was, I think, around 45 to 50. All right. So the results of the study, they present the perceptions of the practicing and non-practicing doctors about medical education and medical work, practice. So this, can we move to the next slide? I've made this table sort of a thing. Yeah, this. All right. So in my methodology, I did a thematic analysis. We read the interview transcripts. We had first transcribed them verbatim. The interviews were bilingual, so we had to translate them into English. And then we did a thematic analysis where we read and reread the transcripts and identified themes. And then we coded those themes and identified sub-themes from within those themes, right? So there were 3 broad themes that emerged. Again, the larger, which we choose to call the socio-economic reasons to quit, the organizational reasons to quit, and the individual reasons to quit. Within the economic, socio-cultural reasons to think, the most visible one was the idea, the primacy of marriage and family. I would have loved to share some quotes, some excerpts from the interviews, but since I was assuming that I wouldn't have that kind of time, I've shared one excerpt, one quote from each of these themes. So one of my respondents, she tells me, once you're domesticated, it's over for you. And there was this statement that would come up in almost every one of my interviews. It was, of course, family comes first. Of course, marriage comes first. When you have to make a decision, of course, family comes first. So when I would probe them that why are you, placed in a situation where you have to make that decision, where the family would have to come first, then, the themes of the organizational reasons would begin to emerge. And a lot of my analysis, again, is situated on the organizational reasons, because that's where we can actually, make policy. The other one was the gender roles. for example, they tell you things like, of course, males don't have to go home and may wake up in the middle of the night to feed the baby. One of my respondents tells me that my husband, he's a good guy. For example, her statement was, he even changes diapers. So, gender roles are so strictly defined that if she's getting even a little bit of support in the household duty from the husband, she's actually thankful for it. One of my respondents tells me, my husband doesn't babysit. So it was interesting, coming across these, how strict these gender roles were. And another very important theme that emerged was education as decoration. I call it education as decoration, but later on in the discussion section, I discuss it in terms of competing discourses. Almost every single one of these medical doctors said how happy the families were when they got into medical school. Medical education is a very prestigious thing in Pakistan. So getting into a medical school, it's a big thing. So every one of them will tell me, each one of them will tell me things about what happened in the family when they first, heard about having gotten into the medical school. So apparently these families, when they're thinking about the girls' education, they're thinking in an altogether other discourse. It's a discourse where the girls should go and get an education and have, an educational degree. But the same family, once the girl uses the same education to go into the workforce and work, is not very happy with the idea. Why? Because now they're thinking in an altogether different discourse. They're thinking in the familial domestic discourse where the family comes first. And now suddenly the career and family are something to choose from. Here, I also invoke the work of Beliapa. Beliapa talks about I think it's Beliapa. I'm sorry if I'm misquoting. About the women in the IT sector of India and how the family's honor is at stake when the woman goes to work, because it's a class thing. The man provides. And when the woman is earning and she's bringing in money into the family economy, it gives off, the idea that she might be contributing to the family because the man cannot provide. So again, several of the interviews were, focused on the idea that I don't need the money. So I might as well quit. I can quit because my husband works, right? So it's not like I need the money anyway. So I called this theme contribution to family economy. But one of my reviewers, when this paper was being published, they liked the term education as decoration. I had just used it somewhere in the write-up, and they asked me to change the name of this theme to education as decoration. And then there are organizational reasons, organizational factors. Organizational factors include how the structures of organizations are so strong and so not ready to change that you're either in or you're out. You're either a good professional, an ideal worker, a good doctor, or you need to leave. One of the reasons why these girls had to opt out was not because of the families, but because of the fact that the transition from a medical student to a doctor also coincides with the transition from being a single person to being a married person. So this is usually the marriageable age in Pakistan, 24, 25, especially when you're a doctor, because there's a lot of studies. If you read the work of Aisha Masood, there's a lot of, I'm not sure if it's the right word of the PC term for it. The demand, there's a lot of demand for medical doctors, as brides, as potential brides. So they get married immediately after their medical education is over. And these two transitions, they happen at the same time. You're just, a new doctor, and you're adjusting in this new family situation. So usually when they coincide, the organization is not ready to change. Right after medical education, in Pakistan, there's a 4-year, it's not exactly a degree, but it's the specialization process. It's called the residency. The residency is extremely difficult, and the time, expected from these doctors is sometimes almost 36 hours at a stretch. So now this is the baby bearing age for these newly married medical doctors. So usually they're forced out. They don't opt out, they're forced out. Gendered routines, again, the routines within organizations are extremely gendered. One of my respondents tells me that it is an understanding that males are generally better surgeons. Patients prefer the surgeons to be males because males are better surgeons. And she said it's sometimes true because women don't get as much time to practice. Males spend more time in the hospitals. And since they do, they have a lot of access, and they form friendships and clubs with the older doctors and with the surgical staff, and they get a lot of opportunities that the women don't because they leave at 5 p.m. or they have to leave at 5 p.m. This particular doctor was situated in Quetta, which is just the provincial capital of Balochistan, where women's mobility is generally extremely restricted. The fact that she's a doctor in itself is, it's a huge deal. So, and then there's lack of childcare facilities. Once they have a baby, it's either leave the baby at home for 36 hours at a stretch or quit your work, because in almost 19 of the doctors that I interviewed were working. I think around 15 of them told me that they had never had the facility, the daycare facility when they were having children, or at the point in time, because hospitals are considered to be spaces unsafe for children for of course safety related purposes. So they don't usually have daycares, and the doctors don't have access to their children once they come to work. So that is, one reason. And then there's the individual situation, where we talk about the individual and we talk about the extension of the individual, which is family. Now, if I were to, thematically analyze this in a context outside of Pakistan, I might have considered the family in the structural reasons. But here, the family, the in-laws, the husband, they're socially constructed as an extension of the self. Several of these women, they could not differentiate between their own opinion and their husband's. So I'm placing it here, but it definitely does not mean individual agency. It just means that is why I call it the individual situation and not individual agency. So that's about it from the results. Again, there's a lot more to it, but I'd share the link to the paper with you people. So again, even though women's careers are seen as a source of pride for the family and a source of honor, paradoxically, it also puts the family at risk of losing its prestige. in ways, for example, that women might contribute to the family income. Secondly, they will interact with male colleagues, which might bring in, which might be a source of slander for the family. This did not emerge as a theme in my research, but it was a very dominant theme in some of the studies having been conducted in India. So I've engaged with this theme in my discussion and kind of compared my results with it. And the third one is the possible neglect of domestic and maternal responsibilities is a major possibility. And the conceptualization of maternal responsibility and domestic responsibility, of course, it comes from the discourses that we discussed earlier, including the colonial discourse and the Islamic discourse and the indigenous South Asian discourse, which is very different, but again, very strong on the idea of domesticity. And irregular social expectations and the relationship between marriage and family. And then there's a whole discussion on workplace related issues. Here we again engage with the works of Hochschild and Joan Acker and discuss how organizations are assumed to be these neutral, ungendered spaces, but they're extremely contributive to the idea that women cannot work because they clearly can't fit in and the organizations wouldn't adjust them. So, yeah, I think that's about it from my side. If there's anything else that you guys might want to ask, please shoot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mariam, for that presentation. And I'll open the floor now to questions and comments, please.
No, thanks a lot, Dr. Mariam. Very, very interesting presentation. I think also some of the issues you mentioned reminded me how it also was in the past in Germany. So I think there's also a lot to learn across generations and societies. But one question, I have several, but I start with one and then give Denise the floor. Since you also talked to women who continue to be doctors, did you ask them how do they manage? So did they have to choose between being married or not married, or between having children or not having children, or did they have a different family support who they say, okay, we take care of your baby? So how did they manage to continue?
Again, there are several ways many of these women had coped up. Some of them weren't married. Most of them weren't married, and they were young. They were in the earlier 20s. One of them had quit, and she began her career after a break of a few years. So her children now were school going. One of them got divorced, and the stories from that particular interview again helped me a lot in understanding the ideas of how sometimes it's not even implicit, the pressure from the family or the society. In other cases, these women have a very strong familial support. Sometimes it's the mother-in-law, sometimes it's the mother who just steps in and takes charge of the situation and takes care of the children. So it's kind of the family, as I said, it's considered as an extension of the self. It helps in taking up the collectivistic, spirit of the family kind of helps in taking up some of the responsibilities. However, this too was seen as a potential problem, but it wasn't a theme that I wanted to engage with because, of course, it was out of the scope of my work. But it does have to do something with gender roles. One of my respondents, for example, tells me that when you have a baby, it's a time when you are compromised. You can't perform all of the responsibilities that are expected of you. So this is a time when the man can finally step in and take charge and maybe get used to performing some of the duties for the child. But this is when the older women of the family step in to help you, but they're actually helping the man because they're helping you as long as you're in a situation where there's homeostasis, where you're fine and you're ready to take charge of your child, and then they'll step out, to help you through with the transition. And the man's life doesn't change. So they have a baby, but they can still go out, hang with their friends, because their mom or the girl's mom is there to take care of the child. So there was a discussion on how several of these patriarchal gender roles were upheld by women themselves, but it wasn't a theme that was relevant to the scope of this particular work. So yeah, maybe in another study.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. This was highly interesting because we often talk about that and these theories, but not very often have a really concrete example as the one that you just gave us, so with numbers and with very specific let's say real people living this kind of how to say, intersections, these ideals of womanhood as well, no? And yeah, I have two questions. One that has to do precisely with this intersectionality. You very well show us how gender and social class and even age converge together to put these women in this situation. And regarding that, I would like to know if you have, if you could perceive also some influence from religion and maybe ethnic group, I don't know, sorry, my ignorance about the reality in Pakistan, or caste maybe, so that other social categories or factors also intersect to create this situation, particularly religion. And my second question has to do with the very strong heritage that you show us, that these women have all this ideal of womanhood with the Islamic discourse, the indigenous ideas of women and men, the colonization past, the colonizing past. So but I know that Pakistan for a while was somehow modernizing, whatever it is, modernizing like the whole world. But now we are seeing a backlash on these, women's rights all over the world, So that again, these ideas are coming to the front. And I don't know if that's also happening in Pakistan and how it is happening, if it is happening, like this backlash on women's going out to the public work, working, being a bit more free in the sense that they are more autonomous. So I don't know, these two questions, please.
I'll answer them one by one. And as long as the intersection of religion and social class are concerned, since this was a part of my doctoral research, this is one of the papers, but in the next paper in the same series, that research is not published yet, but I do investigate, because many of these doctors, what they tell me during their interviews, these respondents tell me that this phenomenon is not, peculiar to the medical workforce. It is just observable in the medical workforce, perhaps because it's such a peculiar case, because medical education is so popular amongst girls, that there are so many girls in the medical education. It's so highly subsidized and there's so much taxpayer money going in that it's highlighted. However, it exists across other sectors as well. So what I did was, in the next paper, I did interviews again with women who had quit their careers and had professional education in several other medical fields, like several other professional fields, like engineering, like law, like design, and there's a few more I forgot. So in this research, this intersection, comes up very visibly. The intersection of the idea of family, of social class, again, because social class is a very important determinant of how the woman's career will be perceived. And I would love to share that paper with the audience as well. Hopefully it'll be published soon. And there's the role of religion, again, in defining not just gender roles, because the gender roles, the cultural gender roles in this part of the world are not particularly religious only. So, but of course there are understandings from religion and culture, and this, the South Asian mix of it, whatever make of it. So yeah, in that paper, we do talk about the intersectionalities. However, we don't consider ethnicity as an important marker of identity, but that's just the Pakistani context. It doesn't come out as visibly as it does in say the European context or the context in the US, because race isn't a very dominant. It of course it is in some cases, but since I did most of my fieldwork in Punjab, so the bag was pretty homogeneous.
And about the backlashes on? Sorry,
yes, the second question. Of course, it is happening in Pakistan, and this might be my lack of exposure, but I'd say more than anywhere else in the world, because I would see it as in Pakistan we're going through this second wave of feminism, if you might call it that. We're a little bit, behind when it comes to understanding feminism. So right now, the criticisms of feminism going on in the and this is just my opinion, of course, I don't have research on this, in the popular discourse, that the criticisms of feminism or feminist women going on are more or less, the same that were happening in the world in the late 1980s, which resulted in the third wave of feminism and intersectional feminism, because one of the biggest criticisms and the backlash going on here in Pakistan towards the Aurat March, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a protest where women march, on the International Women's Day for women's rights, and it faces a lot of backlash on social media, on mainstream media, in regular spaces, in conversations, in the workplaces. So a great deal of these criticisms are focused on these women's social class. So it kind of reminds you of, the white woman and feminism and the white woman's burden. So they talk about how these affluent women having nothing else to do and talking about women's rights and being exclusive of the lived realities of the poor woman or the subaltern woman, etc., etc. And again, this is my opinion. There might be some iota of truth to it, but not completely. There is a lot more representation every passing year in these protests. There's even transgender representation now. But yeah, I think in Pakistan we're a couple of decades, behind when it comes to how we're understanding feminism at the moment.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Tina, please.
Okay, in case you have a question, Sundus, please also go ahead. More thinking like how to change now the situation, Mariam. What would you think would be next steps, maybe specifically for the medical sector, since you have worked more in that? What do you think could be changed, within maybe also the structural issues? I mean, apart from the marriage choice and domesticity.
I think the organization as a center, as a meso level, where the society and the constructions of the society and the womanhood, they interact, is a place where it can begin, where policy making can begin, and constructions of women's careers can change, through this policy. Of course, it's a long shot, but this is a point where we have some kind of influence. And again, theoretically, it comes from theories of central conflation, comes from Baudet's work. The organization kind of forms this kind of a habitus, if I might call it that, where the performative of professionality or professionalism or being a worker, being a working woman happens. And if this performative is supported by the structures of these organizations, such that when this working woman goes home, she does not necessarily live all those realities that the society thinks she will live as if she goes out to work. And if that were to change, I think there might be a very immediate increase in number of working women, even in the medical workforce. The situations in the hospitals, they were terrible. Women did not have protection against harassment. Women did not have protection against nepotism or cronyism, because a lot of that is happening. And I do discuss some of it in the part where I discuss organizational sociological reasons, because women are not part of these, crony groups when it's happening in the organizations. So they don't get, enough promotions, they don't get enough opportunities, and they stay out of, the power circles. So if that were to change, if policies were, to be made by the government and by hospitals in order to, be more sensitive to equal employment opportunities, and I think it's a part of Pakistan's labor laws as well, equal employment opportunity, but it's just a matter of implementation. So yeah, I think the organization gives us a lot of affordance into this matter. But the neoliberal construction of organizations is such that the organization is, exonerated out of this. It is made out to be a social phenomenon and a domestic phenomenon, where the society thinks of this woman in this certain way, and this woman has this, certain life, and she has problems, and the organization is exonerated from this debate. I think that shouldn't happen. The organization has a very important part to play in this situation, whatever sector it is, whether it's medicine or any other sector.
Thank you. If we don't have any questions, I will just ask, my own question. Did you, or if you do, please raise your hands. Did you find any resistance, individual or collective, from within the women that you interviewed? Did you see any hints, or were there any active actions that they were taking to resist or to reform or to demand any reform?
Again, since this was a qualitative study, it lasted over a span of a year. So I spent a lot of time with these people. In the first meetings, no. So, but that's how I think qualitative work is. People don't, immediately open up. You have to probe into their lives, and you have to be part of their lives and build some kind of a rapport. Later on, yes, as I said, some, I think a couple of them did, step out of their marriages, in order to continue with their educations. There's parts to some of the interviews where I was, told to not use in my research, but it goes ahead and tell us a lot about what happens if the woman chooses, to resist. In some cases, because there's a lot of abuse happening. The family can also be a very problematic space, especially the family that you're married into and you're new to. So and there's a couple other instances where these women choose to not get married. So as I said, most of my respondents who are currently working were girls who had decided to not get married immediately after passing out of medical workforce, so medical education. So because they were just, getting used to the transition into the into being a doctor, and they wanted to wait it out until they got married and faced this new transition.
Thank you. And those of us who are not familiar with the context, like walking out of a marriage is like one act that's extremely difficult, and it's really an act of resistance. So I guess that's that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mariam, for joining us, and thank you for the presentation. And if we don't have any further questions, then we can. You do? Okay, Tina.
Maybe
please.
I was just thinking one last thing more, maybe more
Please,
as a comment. the role of universities, because it struck me a little bit when you mentioned this professor who said, why do you even study here? You're going to get married. That's quite harsh, of course, you know, instead of trying to change the system. So is there any discussion, let's say maybe not at individual professor level, but maybe around the university system per se, that they say, okay, we want to, I don't know, change a little bit also our education and at least try to encourage open equal career opportunities or something like that, because your example is just going in the opposite direction. Why should we, I mean, that was a past argument in many countries, why should we educate women anyway, because they are getting married. And so is there any, I don't know, movement, at least discussion national wide, how to address this?
It's partial. What medical colleges have now done is that if you have availed a scholarship to get medical education, then you will have to either complete it or refund all of the money that is spent on your education by the government. But this just lasts for the duration of the medical education. So once you're out of the medical education, there are no bonds. So you can quit after your medical education is completed. And medical education includes, I think, 4 or 5 years of med school, and then 1 year of an internship. It's called a house job. So that's part of it. Once that house job is over, you're out of this contract with the government. But this is the current situation. I haven't followed up, so it won't be completely honest on my part if I say anything at this point. I did this research in 2018 and 19. So it's been 3 years, and 2 of these years were spent, in lockdown. So I'd say in 1 year only. So I'm not fully updated. Maybe I can follow up on this research, sometime in the future, and we will have some answers.
Great, thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Tina, and thank you, Mariam, again. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for your active participation.